I first saw this boat on a trip to Seattle. I was on the Amtrak train, would have been in the mid-80s. And I couldn't get off the train, but I sure wanted to see this boat. And so I made a point to come back and photograph it and take a ride on it, videotape it in 1987.
As far as I know, this is the only footage of this boat known to exist, while still being used as a ferry boat for carrying passengers and cars. The boat's name has been changed from the Tourist II to the Islander when it went to Steilacoom. At the time of this filming, this boat was only being used as a backup boat for holiday traffic. I purposely went up to Steilacoom the weekend of July 4th, 1987, knowing it would be used in revenue service for the holiday. I had done some research and knew that this boat had originally come from Astoria. But little did I know that I would be documenting her for the next 35 years and eventually making this documentary. Apart from peeling paint and deferred maintenance on the outside, the boat looked like it was pretty much original inside. The wooden benches, the windows, the doors, leaving Steilacoom was exciting. I had ridden many ferry boats up in Seattle before, but this was the first time I had ridden on a vintage wooden ferry boat. The boat ride to Anderson Island was enhanced by the soothing, rhythmic sound of the engine. On our trip, we passed the ferry boat, the Steilacoom. It was used in everyday service on this route. Here we are approaching Anderson Island, and we are getting ready to dock. Many people live on this island. The only way on and off is by ferry boat. A gentleman I met on this voyage told me that he had worked on this boat when it was first moved from Astoria to Tacoma. He had a job at a company called Western Bolt in Tacoma. During the next few months, many changes were made to the boat. Window openings were cut into the car deck that resembled portholes, and the superstructure was raised 3 feet to accommodate big trucks.
It's a 15-minute ride compared to a 25-minute ride with the other ferry.
Now you said this because it's a much smaller boat?
This is a smaller, less drag on the boat, on the ferry.
Do you think this is a lot smaller engine in here too?
Yeah. Well, you can see the engine.
You
Have
can?
You filmed that?
No.
On the other side, the door's open. You can look right down at the engine.
Oh,
it's a
great.
big diesel engine. You hear the valves clattering, and just look right down through the doorway there.
Oh.
You can look right down into the engine.
Great tip.
I don't think there'd be any problem. You just stepping inside and just filming the engine.
Oh, great.
It's just probably a big straight. I think it's a big straight 8 diesel.
Straight 8, huh?
Straight 8 diesel.
Wow, amazing.
This was designed as only a one-direction ferry.
Yeah. That means there's only one prop, and that's in the back. Huh?
Yeah. So you reverse it into one and drive it into the other.
I see.
Now I observe the reversing process that our passenger was telling us about. Backing out, turning around, heading back on our trip back to Steilacoom. This boat's service in Steilacoom was the last time it was ever used as a ferry boat. Here we see the crew tying up the boat at the end of the day. The boat was sold to Argosy Cruises in 1996 and extensively remodeled at a cost of over $1 million. It was to be used as a tour boat on Lake Washington. It would never look the same or ever carry commuters and cars again.
Okay, we're here in Kirkland here, and we're visiting the old tourist number 2 from Astoria, built in 1924. It's later called the Islander when it was served in Steilacoom, Washington. Now it's been transferred, remodeled, and fixed into a fancy tour boat called the MV Kirkland. We brought our model of the way it used to look. That was called the Islander. It looks like they're getting ready to leave here pretty soon. It's been totally restored and now called the Kirklander. It's now what you might call a beautiful boat. We rode it first in 1988, and I took footage of walking around on the same deck, and at that time it was pretty derelict, paint chipping off and stuff. Look at it now.
Early morning, August 28, 2010, the Kirkland caught fire in the engine room. Argosy Cruise Lines decided that repairing the damage was not economical. Captain Christian Lint purchased the boat and moved it to Bremerton, where it was moored from 2010 to 2016. During that time, he used it for special events. He was quoted as saying, "These are the last remaining vessels of the vintage maritime fleet. Frankly, they are floating museums." Lint was a local captain with an interest in salvaging old boats. He worked as a tugboat captain, aerospace designer, and delivered yachts around the world. But restoring old boats was his passion. After purchasing the boat and repairing it, Lint put the boat up for sale. In 2015, it caught the eye of Astoria native Robert Jacob. Robert Jacob was instrumental in bringing the ferry boat back to Astoria in 2016.
These girls, the board members, raise your hand. Come on, Dorothy. Come on, you guys. There you are. They're doing the work all the time, and I just wanted them to get recognition for it. And I'm so old, I paid 25 cents to get on that ferry with a bicycle and got my burger on the Chessman and a ride over to Fort Columbia and come back. And Mom was always disappointed that I came back. And there's not very many times you can do stuff like this, and these people are putting it together. And the trolley, the Armory, the Liberty Theater, the Riverwalk, all those projects had a million naysayers, but it took characters like this to make that work. So my hat's off to her.
Okay, we're here at Floyd Holcomb's Pier 39. The citizens of this city, Astoria, have been able to bring this ferry boat back to Astoria, this historic wooden ferry. It's kind of amazing that this boat has survived when all the others are gone. It was saved. It was saved twice, 3 times. And people that come here to see it can see what life was like back then in Astoria, when people used to ride the ferry back and forth on the Columbia River. People can come here and see the boat. The boat is not a replica. This is like the real thing. Okay, so it's pretty cool, and I feel like I've been part of it, documenting it from the 80s.
Into the wheelhouse, and how beautiful it is. This has some real powerful good energy here. Look at this wheel. And this is where, I don't have my flashlight, but you can see, look at the impregnated, right here you see the rope sign. See the rope indentions?
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty impressive, huh?
Yeah.
So we're doing some work here with the bow thruster system, because I had the bow thruster, the controllers were burned up when I got the boat. Part of that fire, it was right there where the heat spot, so that did melt the pot. So I hardwired it. And it works perfect.
Great. Tell me.
This is the alarm system. Every compartment in the boat, every bilge section I took the compartments,
Yeah.
all has sensors in each one.
Wow.
Is that something?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just, I mean, that's unbelievable amount of wiring for that.
So what does that tell you? That there's water in that compartment?
Yeah, it'll come on. If a plank let loose, that compartment would fill. It would be contained in that compartment, so it's not bad at all. One of the Coast Guard friends of mine said, "Well, Chris, you never know if a plank bursts, which they don't do it, by the way. The planks do not. You can't get a plank off this boat. It's so ingrained into the boat. But if it did, it would fill that compartment. Big deal. That's it.
One
And
compartment out of how many?
Oh, I think there's about 24.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So that's a great backup system.
Yeah. Oh, it's a safety. Well, on top of the fact that the boat can't sink anyway, because there's so much displacement of wood, it's positive with the buoyancy, and those big air tanks.
Yeah.
And the sanitation systems are all big tanks full of air. So it's just silly to think that somebody's life's at peril for sitting at the dock here because of Coast Guard regulations.
Tell me, what's it like to operate this boat from up here?
It's very intimidating until you realize it's so peaceful and simple.
Well, Ocean Park
Yeah, yeah. Helm to helm is 14 turns.
is on the east side of the peninsula, and it is at the port of the peninsula. So this is
It's
a
a lot of turns. Okay, that's
this is
hard
where
over,
you go to find
right?
yachts.
Yeah.
Now,
This is where you go to find yachts.
1,
So you can come and see what a
2, here's the king close. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Wow.
So, back and filling is a chore. So you go back about 6 turns and then you're heading straight. It's much better without power.
But can you imagine elfing
Yeah.
doing this every day? How many trips every
How
day?
tough that guy was. He was one tough Swede. Drop downs.
That's what I thought.
Isn't it something? It's amazing.
They drop down into a pocket,
Yeah, yeah.
but now they're sealed shut.
Well, they're sealed for weatherizing, but you know, ultimately they should be put back to drop down. You know, Astoria gets hot in the summertime.
Yes.
So isn't it amazing? I mean, that's a lot of extra detail that nobody really. Well, I never really noticed until the wood people. So, just as a sideline, the whole boat has been all outfitted with certification of fire systems, fire suppression system. So, all new hoses. It's got a whole CO2 system down below. $100,000 worth of fire protection.
Great.
People don't really see the value of that, but it's really expensive. So that's part of the certificate of inspection, the COI. That you don't have to with a 12-pack. You don't have to have that with 12-pack. Over 12 passengers. Like I said, 12 passengers, money is money. You know, if you want to support itself, you can have little cocktail cruises or champagne or wine tasting. I'd love to get tied up with the Delta Queen, the big paddle wheeler, and say, where are those people when they come to Astoria? Where do they go? Well, they want to go see the vineyards. Well, why not have 10 vineyards represented here for wine tasting on board here?
Yeah.
It'd be perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
People have asked me, especially at coffee shops, small talking, what's the best job you ever had? And it was easy for me to answer that because I told them the best job I ever had was working on the Tourist 2 ferry boat. And it wasn't really like a job. It felt more like a boat cruise, going back and forth across the river, meeting people. It's kind of like a summer vacation for me, and I got paid for it besides. So it was a great time for me on the Tourist 2. I was only 20 years old when I served on the Tourist 2 as a deckhand. I learned a lot of things, especially from the captain. So our captain, we called him Captain Jack. Jack Thomas, I believe, and he'd been on the river for quite a while. A lot of other ferryboat people thought he was a curmudgeon. Grumpy old guy, gruff, short-tempered. He would speak out, he would speak loudly, he would yell at people sometimes, and a lot of people didn't have a good opinion of him, but he knew how to steer the boat across the river and get in and out of the boat slips And interestingly, I got along with him famously. Maybe because I was his junior deckhand, didn't know much, but I think Jack would get lonely up in the wheelhouse all by himself sometimes, so he'd ring the 2 bells and I'd have to go up. But he'd always tell me stories about his little farm where he had goats and raised vegetables and strawberries, and he had a blackberry patch, and he was always talking. He wanted I was a good listener, is what it turned out. And I was non-judgmental, and so he and I got along fine. So I'd like to tell you about a day in my life as a deckhand on the Tourist #2. My first duty was to go up on top to the 3rd deck and put up the American flag. So I got that out of the wheelhouse and went back to the stern, hoisted the American flag, saluted it, and then I went down below to untie the boat so we could get out of our slip. The engine had already had the engine warmed up. The captain had come on board. The other deckhand, Herb, and I untied the boat. We jockeyed back around and got into the ferry slip as soon as the chessman pulled out. Tied up to the ramp and started taking cars on board. We had walk-on passengers too, but they could walk on and go up to the 2nd deck, up some stairs. So anyway, once we got everybody on board, we signaled the captain we're ready to go, and the ramp operator would raise the ramp and we'd back the ferry boat out. We were facing in towards Marine Drive, and we'd back out and we'd throw the stern, the captain would throw the stern in reverse downriver, 90 degrees, and then we'd head east. Even though we had a diesel engine, we did not have a gearbox. And so in order to go from reverse to forward or forward to reverse, the instrument had to stop the engine and reverse the rotation of the crankshaft. So that took a little doing. Anyway, we'd back out in reverse and then get the boat turned around and head east a little bit, and we had to dogleg across the Columbia River. We had to stay in the ferry channel, which went northwest over towards the Washington side. And the first trip across the river from Astoria to Megler, my primary job was to polish the brass in the wheelhouse. Captain Jack, who was quite famous, had certain duties for me. I had to wash his windows and I had to polish the brass. And then we could talk on our way over. But I remember I always had to polish brass, polish brass, polish brass. This happened at the 14th Street ferry landing, where we had just unloaded a boatload of cars off from the boat, and the last car to come off our ferry boat was a sedan pulling a travel trailer. And the ramp had a little bend in it. The car's rear tires lifted, and the tongue on the trailer lifted, and the back of their travel trailer scraped our foredeck. So that's not a biggie, but the big thing was their sewage system. Their pipe that came out of their sewer holding tank got knocked off, and so all of this sewage came out on our foredeck.
Oh, no.
Captain Jack saw that, and he comes running out there, and this is interesting. He didn't ever mince words. He says, "Get the hose and wash that crap off the deck." And so the other deckhand was somewhere else on the boat, and so I was right there. So I had to get the fire hose out, which was the canvas type, on a spool. And so I undid the pin and rolled out the fire hose, And then I had to go turn on the valve to get the water. And while I was going back up to get it at the end of the fire hose, the captain told the engineman to turn on the pressure for the water pump pressure. And so before I got up to the end of the hose, I was about 20 feet back from the end, the water came on. And so the hose started jumping around all over the place, and I didn't have a good hold on it. This hose was jumping all over the place, squirting water everywhere. People on shore were laughing, and Jack was up on the top deck laughing. So I kind of got my arms around that hose and worked my way out like 1 foot at a time. I didn't dare try to go out and tackle the tip because, see, that was solid brass, tapered and heavy. That could kill a person easy, or damage the deck, or do something bad. So I finally worked out to the tip and got a hold of it, and then I corralled it. But it was lifting me off the deck. There was so much pressure and power. But it didn't take long to wash off the foredeck. I mean, just hose it off. Didn't even have to brush it. I just hosed it off. And then they turned off the water, and I kind of rolled up the hose back on the spool and put everything away, and then it was time to load cars again. But
You were up in the air?
I was off the ground. It was blowing, so it was amazing.
The captain was laughing.
He was laughing. Yeah.
Oh, no.
It wasn't always a straight arrow. He didn't always go by the rules, but he was fun. Late in the day in the summer, we'd be heading across the river. We knew it was our last trip back, and so we were feeling a little more relaxed. And Captain Jack would call me up to the wheelhouse to talk a little bit. He could tell more stories. But on our way back, we were almost to the Astoria side. He had his radio station on, KVAS, and this song came on. And it had been released in 1963 by Nat King Cole. And so we were up there watching the shoreline, and the song came on. Roll out those lazy, hazy, crazy days of summer. Those days of soda and pretzels and beer. That's how it started. Now the last two verses, the refrain in this song was, "You'll wish that summer would always be here." Jack and I really liked that song, and we decided that was going to be our theme song for the Tourist #2. And it was amazing because the last trip across, the sun was going down, and there was a sunset forming, and the sun was still not below the horizon, and so the sunlight would reflect off the windows of the businesses and houses in town. It was just, they would sparkle. And Jack would turn off his radio, it would get pretty quiet, except we had the drone, the humming drone of the engine down below. And the boat was very smooth. It didn't list, it didn't pitch, it just very smooth riding through the water. So everything got totally quiet. And so it was like we were in a different world. It was kind of, I don't know how I would explain it, kind of surreal. Like it wasn't really happening, but fantastic experience. We could see the dock in Astoria we were heading to. We could see the light reflecting off the windows. It was quiet. It was peaceful, very peaceful.
I grew up in Astoria, Oregon. I was born in 1957 and lived here all my life. My maternal grandparents lived across the river in Deep River, Washington. And my mom and I, when my dad was working at CRPA, the cannery, we would take the ferry to go visit my grandparents in the summer, probably 4 to 5 times a week. And in the winter, we would go on the weekends because we would help my grandparents. They were dairy farmers. My grandfather was also part of the butterfly fleet of gill netters. So I've got many, many fond memories of tourist number 2. Riding on the ferry, going over to see my grandpa and grandma. And as a kid, I was then between ages 1 and then 9 when the ferry stopped because they built the bridge in 1966. Couldn't have a better childhood than riding a ferry every day of your life and going to visit my grandparents. The ferry boat would run aground sometimes on the sandbar that's between Astoria and Megler, and quite often, in fact. So this is when I was obviously 6, maybe 7 years old. I'd run down to the car and get my coloring book and bring it back up to where the tables were on the second floor of the tourist number 2. And I would color for 2 to 3 hours until the tide came in to lift the ferry off the sandbar so he could proceed to Megler. And my mom always said that it was because of those 2 to 3 hours every day of the week, or 4 or 5 times a week, that I had a passion for art and architecture, and I ended up pursuing my passion and became an architect. So I think it's because of tourist number 2 that I established my career in the art and architectural world. So I thank the captain for running aground. Once in a while, we were maybe given a treat or given a nickel to go buy a snack up at the snack bar. You know how kids are. I just remember we would go down into the car deck, and there were hoses and life preservers and blocks and areas that you weren't supposed to be within a certain, they would take them off. And then, of course, up on the second and third levels, whether they were restrooms or storage rooms or the pilot house, you know, we got in trouble sometimes, my brother and I. But when you ride a ferry that's that small, you try to discover things as a curious child. So it was kind of like another game that we would play when we rode the ferry. But yeah, we were probably some pretty sneaky kids. And sometimes we just sit in the car.
For the whole trip?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially if the weather wasn't good.
So did you ever ride over there with your dad too?
Yes, on the weekends. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Dad worked in the canneries for Bumblebee Seafoods, or CRPA, if you know that company, for 52 years. But on the weekends, we would all go over as a family to visit the grandparents. Obviously, we had a car, and when I was very young, I remember we would all pile into the Rambler. Dad had 2 Ramblers that were given to him 10 years apart from my Uncle George. Anyway, we'd take the Rambler and go on the ferry. This would always freak me out because they'd put those blocks underneath the tires so you didn't roll off into the water. The Ramblers were like the little round ones.
Little sedans.
Yeah, with a pink one and a blue one. They're the cutest little cars in the world. I wish I had one of them. And when Mom was driving, she was kind of not a very good driver, but they built the new highway then later. And I would remember when we upgraded to an Oldsmobile, Mom would leave the farm at the last possible minute to get to the ferry landing, and the captain would see her coming, going probably 80 miles an hour, and they would hold the ferry until she got down to the dock, even though it was past departure time, so she could be the last one on the ferry. And this happened more than once. I remembered it was one of those white-knuckle experiences.
Doesn't this show kind of the informality of the whole operation? They recognized her car?
Yeah, and you know, the way small towns are, everyone knows everyone. But yeah, that's the 14th Street dock.
Yeah. So that's where you caught it, right?
Yeah, and then the cars would line up over here. There were 3 lanes, and they would take each lane every 30 minutes. Yeah, they come here, and then the lanes would go all the way down to almost down to the Maritime Museum. Well, we're the Coast Guard docks now. This was the waiting lanes.
Oh, I see. Parallel to the water?
Correct, yeah. And they were probably 30 cars deep.
Each lane?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Yeah, so they had significant traffic.
That's like 90 cars altogether.
Yeah. Yeah, these piers, sometimes the guy wouldn't steer straight. So that was always freaky, docking and redocking.
You hit some of these pilings.
And they had some give to them.
Here's Megler here. You probably, maybe you've seen this picture.
Or dismal niche, as they called it, Lewis and Clark called it. Boy, that's back in the day, yeah.
Is that what it looked like when you were?
Yeah. Had a little commissary, kind of a little cafe thing. But nothing else was there except for this. And Deep River was to the right, and Ilwaco was to the left. Ilwaco and Chinook. My grandfather, Alfred Nemi, was the master carpenter for Tourist No.2 when he worked for Wilson Brothers Shipyard. And here's a ship, the Sun Soon, which was built in 1915, and he's the second from the left. And there were some very impressive ships that came out of Wilson Brothers. This is the ship launching facility at the now, which is the Astoria Roundabout. And these are very large, 130, 140 foot wooden hull ships for World War I. These are some of the pictures I found downstairs. And here's the inside of one of the wooden hulls. I'm sure it's all old growth fur. This is a photo of one of the ceremonial launches that happened at the shipyards. And the last picture I found was part of the crew, which looks like a bunch of rough and tumble Scandinavians putting these wonderful ships together here in Astoria. So he was basically a foreman of the crew, but obviously a finished carpenter. And by them noting that he's a master carpenter meant he was in charge of building Tourist No.2.
Wow. Do you know where that boat was built?
Right down here. Right at the roundabout.
Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, right where this was.
Wow.
So, little did I know, growing up, riding the ferry, that I was riding a ferry that my grandfather's hands built. And that's very emotional.
Well, we're looking down on the little tourist number 2 here. Could be its final resting place. This piece of Astoria history here is for sale. And Captain Lute, the owner of the boat, wants $225,000 for it. And that seemed like a fair price. I mean, you could live on this boat. It's got a kitchen, 2 stories, you know, it's a great old wooden boat, ferry boat. We'll see if anyone wants to buy it. If not, it's just tied up to a piling here. It's not in any official moorage, so it does not have any electricity going to it, and usually what that means is there's no power to the bilge pumps. And without bilge pumps, the bilge starts filling up with water. Every boat leaks a certain amount of water, especially wooden boats leak water. And eventually the bilge fills up with water and the boat sinks. That's it. That's the end of the boat.
It's the memories that we carry with us when we're long gone. And it's those memories that are still so sharp in my mind. And the joy and the fun that this little ferry boat will be missed. Sorry.
Okay.
And we're just about ready to, we're going to ride this old vintage ferry, the Islander. Just a few minutes. It's coming into dock here. And we're going to catch it. It's kind of a windy day. It's July 5th. Yesterday was July 4th. It's a Sunday, 1987. And it's about 70 degrees, but it's quite breezy.
I'm so glad that, Ron, you're making this documentary, and that I saw it in the Daily Astorian, because it's making a personal, local reference to history and preserving history. Hats off to you, because future generations will watch this. Current generations, obviously, who are familiar with it, will bring back fond memories. And it's this kind of passion and commitment that you have for Tourist Number 2, I think, is accolades to you for taking this project on and giving back to Astoria.